Mobile hunters, if you're interested in upping your mobile game, then head to tetherednation.com and check out their saddle gear. There are a few things that you can buy that will actually help you become a better deer hunter or give you the freedom to hunt any tree or any situation. This reason is why I started saddle hunting in the first place and why I use Tethered's gear. I can honestly say that Tethered's saddle gear has changed how I hunt for the better. Big tree, little tree, from the ground, it doesn't matter. I'm untethered by my gear to hunt the best setup for the situation instead of hunting for a tree that my gear can use. My current course setup consists of the Phantom saddle, tethered one sticks, and the Predator platform, and along with an assortment of their accessories. So if you want to up your mobile game, head over to tetherednation.com. If you're like me, you spend a lot of time poring over maps, looking at weather data, all in an effort to help predict when and where my best times are to hunt. It'd be nice if there was a reliable source with all this information in one place. Enter the Spartan Forge app. Unlike some other predictive apps on the market, Spartan Forge was created from military combat intelligence experience tailored for hunters and stands at the nexus of machine learning and whitetail deer hunting. No more man-made algorithms. This is a predictive model based on real GPS-collared deer data, historical and predictive weather, and the next level of mapping imagery, all at my fingertips. I've had an opportunity to use the desktop version of Spartan Forge last year and recently the beta version of the iOS app, and it has replaced all of my other mapping tools. Head over to SpartanForgeAI.com to sign up today to get your place in line as the mobile app launches soon. This podcast is brought to you by Skull Brew Coffee Company. Skull Brew Coffee roasts premium single origin coffee, guaranteeing to deliver the freshest coffee directly to your doorstep. The kicker? They're 2% for conservation certified and donate 10% of their proceeds back to organizations who support the interests of our hunting community. So go to skullbrewcoffee.com and pick up one of their 3-killer roasts and fuel your hunt and fill more tags with Skull Brew Coffee. Welcome to the Truth from the Stand Deer Hunting Podcast, brought to you by Skull Brew Coffee Company. I'm your host, Clint Campbell, and you're listening to episode number 253. Today, I'm joined by my buddy Jake Hofer, covering his favorite time of year, Scrape Week. So stay tuned. All right. What is up, everyone? Happy Wednesday to you. Hope you're doing well. Hope you are feeling fine. It is here. The game has begun. It is, as I mentioned in the intro from my buddy Jake Hofer, it is Scrape Week, which has quickly become one of my favorite weeks to hunt. I used to be more of a beginning of November guy, which I still love that time of year. You know, we refer to it as Sweet November for a reason. But this week is that week where if you have some intel on a buck and he's been kind of frequenting some scrapes, so to speak, or you're in his wheelhouse, maybe is one way to say it. Knowing that and having that kind of annual data on scrapes this time of year and this week specifically, it can be a killer and go a long way to filling your tag. And so much so, I don't think I mentioned this on the last podcast because I put this together over the weekends and then I hunted during the week a little bit. But I had similar intel, and my favorite time period is actually that kind of like 15th through the 20th. I really like that time period. That's just been historically some places where I run cameras where I see the first kind of daylight sighting of the bigger deer that are in the area, so to speak. Doesn't necessarily always mean that the biggest deer hit that scrape or whatever the case is, but it's been consistent now that window, and it happens different times in different places. There's one place, and Jake and I talk about it a little bit in this session, but it's around the 18th on one spot. And so I hunted the 18th and had an encounter with, there are 2 deer that were hitting this particular scrape over the course of, fall, I guess late summer into early fall, that were, kind of told me that they were going to be around, and that held true. And so that 18th kind of date, as long as I had the right wind, that was whenever I saw a flurry of kind of daylight activity, in years past. And so I made plans to be there and was there. And, I ended up seeing 4 bucks, and one was one of the shooters that I was wanting to try to get an arrow in. Had him at 20 yards and just could not get a shot off. So it's happened to me twice now this year to where I've had shooter bucks, target bucks within bow range, and just couldn't pull a shot off. This one, Came in, slipped in kind of quiet. I couldn't really see him real well at first, and so I was having a hard time kind of discerning which buck it was. And then by the time I realized which buck it was, I had kind of run out of time in terms of getting drawn because he was passing the last little bit of cover. And shame on me. It's like I should have just drawn and been ready, but I wasn't real sure. There's a couple different deer that have a similar kind of frame, I guess, if you will. One's one's a big 8 that kind of has a non-symmetrical side. Another one's a really big 8 that's kind of wide and just like perfectly symmetrical. And then there's another 8 that looks exactly like that wide one, only he's clearly younger and he has just shorter tine length. And so I couldn't discern if it was him or if it was the longer tine length 8. And it was, of course, the longer tine length 8 point. So when he kind of crossed that last little bit of brush where I would have had an opportunity to shoot, he was actually head up on me as well. So even if I would have gotten drawn, probably not a high likelihood that I would have gotten a shot opportunity anyway, just by the way he was positioned and kind of coming in. But there were some lessons learned on that hunt, watching bucks kind of come in into that scrape, because they kind of had me fooled based on camera intel, because I wasn't running anything on video. And so how they were entering, how I thought they were entering the scrape is not exactly how they were entering the scrape. So have to tweak my setup. I'll probably get one more hunt in there, possibly this week, as I'll have the right wind. Unfortunately, over the 30th, 29th and 30th, I think it's Friday and Saturday, going to have the complete wrong wind for that, unfortunately. So going to try to get a hunt in the middle of the week and capitalize on having the correct wind. But with that, we're going to go ahead and get moved into today's show. 2 quick things for you before we jump in. Head over to skullbrewcoffee.com and pick yourself up some coffee. Don't suffer shitty coffee on your travel hunts. We have cool killer pour over packs. So you have baller coffee in the mornings for your travel hunts. We also have regular coffee as well. You can use the promo code TFTS21. Save yourself some cash on that. And then head to truthfromthestand.com and go to the merch tab. Pick yourself up some dope Truth merch. Again, TFTS21 promo code. Save yourself some cash on that as well. Have a killer show for you guys today. Have my good buddy Jake Hofer on. Jake is, of course, one of the owners of Exodus. He kind of handles all the marketing and sales over on the Exodus side of things. I've known Jake for a while. Jake is one of those guys, and I kind of mentioned in the podcast, I refer to as a quiet or unassuming killer. He just seems to, Chad and I kind of have a running joke to where it's like, if you need a big deer killed within our group of friends, within our crew, probably need to call Jake to do it. Cause it seems like every year you get into November, if it doesn't happen this week, his favorite time of year is scrape week, you get into November and you can almost be certain you're going to get a text message with a slob that Jake has put on the ground. He's just kind of made a habit of it. And deer's been something that's been in his life for forever. I'm hard pressed to find a bigger deer nut than Jake. And so I really just enjoyed this conversation. We also talk a little bit about the demonetization of YouTube, like the things that happened a couple weeks ago with a couple YouTube channels that scare. We kind of talk about that a little bit. And then, of course, Jake's love for scrapes. Jake is one of those guys that, I've always kind of appreciated scrapes. And it wasn't really until I started talking with Jake a lot at trade shows and stuff like that, when I would go work the Exodus booth or John Eberhart, where I really started understanding how to hunt them and the time frames in which they can become a critical kind of strategy, or it can become kind of like the backbone of a strategy for some really good hunts. So with that, and also I'll just say annual data as well around scrapes. Like, he is one of the guys that I kind of picked that up from and have paid close attention to, and it's been paying dividends where it's putting me in position to have some really good encounters the past couple of years. So without further ado, we'll go ahead and get jumped into today's podcast. And as always, I want to thank you all for listening. All right, folks, welcome back to another episode of the Truth from the Stand Deer Hunting Podcast. And today, I got to say, man, admittedly, I'm a little embarrassed that it has taken me this long to have you on. I have my good buddy, Jake Hofer from Exodus Outdoor Gear on the line with me. What's going on, brother?
Not too much. It's I like these early morning podcasts because I'm fresh and undistracted. So thanks for having me on here. I'm really excited. I've listened to your podcast on and off for a really long time, and I've learned a lot and got a lot of value from it. So hopefully I can pass that forward. We'll see.
Well, I'm sure you will, and I appreciate that, man. It's like you're all bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, ready to go. I got up, got a workout in it. I'm still literally sweating from the workout. Like, I grabbed a shower, but like I haven't haven't kind of wore off like the post workout sweat yet. So
Yep.
if I look moist on this end, that's that's why. And that's a gross word too, moist. It's just
Some people do not like that.
no. I think it's held in high regard for certain things. I think looking at a friend is maybe not one of those. You know.
Hey, Clint, you're looking real moist over there.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. Oh man, I think we should probably pivot from that before we go down hard pivot. But what have you been up to, man? I know you always stay super busy, and I'm guessing the that hasn't changed for you. You always have your hands in a lot of different things. So what have you been up to?
A lot of things actually. I just actually finished up moving. Actually, today would be 3 weeks from when I just moved. So that always, I was over optimistic of how little work that would actually take, and I was like, oh, we'll just move on on an evening after work, and that
Yeah.
morning, and we'll be no.
Yeah, no.
And then so I've been just got settled in here, or starting to get settled in. I'm in the basement right now. I'm redoing my remodeling my office right now. That will be my office, and scrape week's rolling in. Exodus is in full swing, humming along. It's been an awesome year, despite some of the logistics and supply chain issues that everyone's aware of. But it's been really awesome to see the brand grow. I don't want to say mature because we're still very young. This is our 6th year in business, but just from what year 3 to year 6 has happened, has me really excited for the future too. And then real estate's been really busy as well. So it's just been honestly just a banner year up to this point, and I have so much to be thankful for.
Nice. Yeah, and hopefully you keep that ball rolling into the whitetail woods as well,
I hope so, man. It won't be from lack of trying if it doesn't happen. But
Right. Well, I keep busting Chad's chops. I was like, dude, you have to count on Cameron and Jake to kill all the deer around there, man. He's like, I know. He was like, they're the killers, dude. They're the killers of the bunch. And like that's the thing. Like you're very unassuming, man. And like I've talked to him about that, not on the podcast, just like offline. I was like, Jake is like one of the better hunters that I know. I was like, he gets it done consistently, and you have a method. You know what I mean? It kind of leads to that consistency,
Yeah.
And like, we're definitely going to dive into that, but it's like, he's always very unassuming. I was like, but he's that quiet lurker that's always just picking up the information as people are talking. And then all of a sudden, like, end of October shows up and Jake's got a slob on the ground.
Yeah. I don't know. I think I take a lot of the conversations for granted, like some of the people that we actually get to talk to and run like personal scenarios by. And I think sometimes that complicates my thought process.
Yeah.
In terms of, because you have like all these conflicting principles of like, what should I do? But it's been, I've learned a lot in the last 3 or 4 years, which has me even more excited for, the upcoming years and future as well.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. It's like you have to get to a point to where you start to trim the fat a little bit. You have to kind of contextualize,
what's my method? What's my style that works for me?
Yeah, what can I adopt? Because there might be something you hear that's really, really smart, and you're like, oh man, that's a really smart, really good idea. But it might be one of those things where just my personality, like I don't have the patience to execute it, and so then therefore it's not a really good option for me, because even though it will work under the right circumstances, I don't have the right makeup, or the patience or whatever it is. It's like someone who wants to start beast hunting, but they don't want to go walk for miles to find sign or whatever. You know what I mean? It's like, it's a great principle. It's a great approach. But if you're not a grinder type of person, it's probably not for you. You know what I mean? Whereas the person who is a grinder type person, running a bunch of trail cameras and relying on a bunch of, annual data may not be the best approach for them. They could be successful if they could. Right. But their personality just may not allow them to be patient enough to do that, and they get frustrated and don't enjoy it or whatever.
That's the key thing. Yeah. I think you got to figure out what you actually enjoy and it's all about longevity. What can you do and, really enjoy? Otherwise you're going to start making, poor decisions.
Yeah. So with that, man, I know you're a first time offender on this podcast.
Yeah.
So I always like to kind of just make sure everyone is aware of, who the person is on the other end and what they do for a living. So if you wouldn't mind, just a little bit about you and, what you do for a living in the whitetail world.
Yeah. My name is Jake Hofer. I'm from Illinois. One of the co-owners of Exodus, handle a lot of the marketing for Exodus and brand direction, and kind of oversee all the content. And then I'm also a licensed broker in the state of Illinois. So the two have kind of tandem together, and I've really super lucky to be able to do what I do for a living, and also thoroughly enjoy Whitetails 365.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. And I don't, and knowing you, man, it's like luck had, I would say, nothing to do with it. You're like one of the most prepared people I know. And everything you do is very thoughtful. So the fact that you're having success, not just with Exodus, but outside of that, is not a big surprise. But what was the thing that kind of got you? I know the thing, like whenever I saw you were getting into the land stuff, like I wasn't surprised because I was like, this is a natural kind of evolution. Like in my mind, I was like, he's already in the whitetail world, and you were even growing up, to
A little bit, yeah,
to a degree, right?
Yeah.
And so then the Exodus thing happens, and you're very familiar with the area that you live for a bunch of reasons. One is, because you've grown up there, but two, like you're just very aware of the habitat, the surroundings, and like what the neighborhood looks like whenever you're hunting. Like that's a big thing for you. It's not just like the micro of the property, it's the macro of like what else is going on around me. And that's how 100%. You would approach hunting. And so whenever I saw you were getting into land, I was like, that's not a far stretch. I was like, because the dude actually is on point with basically everything that's around him already. And who better to sell, or sell or buy from than a person like that who really has their pulse on things. So what was that like getting into that? What was the final kind of like catalyst, I guess?
I got my license actually my senior year of college.
Oh wow. Okay.
Yeah, and so I mean, it was still the same thing. I realized I always have a lot of stuff going on because then I was writing articles for Wide Open Spaces to basically pay my rent. I was selling deer pee to help pay for college, and then I was like, I'm just gonna get my real estate license. And then so I went through
Why not?
the course. Yeah, I went through the coursework, and I failed it twice. I failed the test twice because I had all these other things on. I had a heavy level of coursework, and I took my studies very seriously. And then I buckled down. I said, okay, it's time to like really study. I read the real estate handbook that if I would have read the first time, I would have passed it the first time, but I had to do it my way.
Right.
And then so I got my license, and I really didn't do too much. Obviously, I was 22 years old. Did not do too many transactions the first maybe one or two a year, and then really the last 2 years moved back to where I was growing up, and it's just been really busy. And I guess that evolution has just been talking when you're in it every single day, and you're talking to customers of Exodus, or you're talking to people that are reaching out, and whatever the case may be. It's like that deal flow is just so natural and unforced, and that's where it's just kind of it's really taken a course of its own. And I think that I plan on having my license for my entire life. So that's the approach that I have. Of it's like I want to do everything the right way. I don't want anyone to say I'm a slime ball or anything like that, and do things the right way.
Right. You're playing the long game.
Exactly. Yeah. I plan on living here, and I do not want to be the hermit that's like can't go to public because they're like, hey,
that guy sold me a lemon.
Yeah.
You don't exactly. You don't want to be the town used car salesman for sure.
No, not at all. And so it's just been really good. And it's like one deal leads to another, and then like it's just kind of it's just naturally happened. I don't know. It's
right.
naturally to me, but it's been a lot of work too. It just did not happen overnight at all.
Right. And any good thing it's built on and you're building it on a good foundation. I'm just curious, how much, did Exodus and just like some of the visibility that you have through the company in general, was that, I mean, I'm sure that was helpful from a standpoint of like,
sure.
You were already part of a reputable company. They knew your face maybe from that. So there was like a level of comfort. People had work, reaching out to you because of that.
For sure. Yeah. There's been some of that. And then it's like some people, it's almost taboo in the real estate world to say you have another job. And so it's like, there's other times where it's like, you have to read the person. Like if they're a diehard whitetail person, happy to divulge that. And most of the time they know of Exodus, or they're at least familiar with the name. And there's other times where, someone that I just don't think that they'll have a clue like anything about Exodus. And I don't mention it because there's like this stigma. It's like, okay, well, if you're doing this like full time, quote unquote, then like, how do you have another job, and vice versa? And reality of it is it's nights and weekends, because that's when people are available to look at properties and talk about them.
Yeah, exactly. So before we jump into hunting specific stuff, we were talking just before we started recording. We have a pretty tight knit group of friends, so to speak, and I work in marketing and advertising, and you're one of my buddies who's in the outdoor space who also obviously works in marketing and advertising. So few folks I get to nerd out with when it comes to business and marketing stuff. And we, of course, and I wanted to talk to you really bad whenever this all kind of happened, and just, unfortunately we were trying to schedule and get this on, but, we had the whole demonetization YouTube kind of fiasco that happened however many kind of weeks ago. And it seems like for now, at least, everything has been the ships have been righted to a degree.
Yeah.
At least it's what I've kind of seen on social media or whatever the case is. I have a kind of point of view on it, but what was your What's your point of view on the whole demonetization scare, where you think things are headed? How do you safeguard yourself against those things if you're a brand that's what you rely on?
Yeah, I'll break that down. So I guess the first thing of where do I think, or what did I think of it? Well, we've seen that in the gun space. It
Yeah.
happened with the gun space earlier, and a lot of those people just started a brand new channel that had no guns. They still kept their gun channel, and like it was a form of still like their top of their funnel to get people to their new, more monetized channel. Because
Hmm.
yeah, they would still put content there, but they would not make necessarily any money at all. And then they started fresh, and maybe since they already had a big audience, they pivoted. And so that was
Right.
my first thought. I was like, well, for hunting, that would be a little bit more challenging, I think. And then, you know, where do I think it's going? I don't know. I mean, I would hate to bet against YouTube, honestly. Like you have the Google backing, it's like one of
Yeah.
the largest companies in the world. Now, the hunting in the scope of YouTube and in the scope of Google is like literally a speck of sand.
Nothing.
Like
Yeah.
it's they could squash that. Like they could eliminate all that and they would not even feel
Yeah. It would not
anything
even
of it.
show up on their bottom line.
Well, and I think that, and then again, I was like, well, it seems like all these other companies are just now figuring out YouTube, and like I see a lot of ads from the outdoor space that are actually getting ran on some of these channels, which is
Hmm.
interesting. But I I'm still like very bullish on YouTube, and I don't think anything's going to happen. But now, as a creator, like a pure, like for us, we have a channel. We put out a ton of content. We have a great team that does a lot. Like we would not be able to do it without the team we have in place. But it's also we have a product. Like we're a product first company.
Right.
Like we're all about educating, but we're not making money. Like we're not paying the bills with YouTube ad revenue.
Right.
So
Right.
now, like someone like some of these other creators, I would be building up my email list like no other, and I think that's kind of happened. I mean, I've seen Seek One started a e-course, which has been in the process for a long time,
Hmm.
and then you look at I think THP just started a course as well, and
Hmm.
so you see those kind of pivots. And then the other question of it is too, it's like with other like network television, you had to pay to get on there
Right.
and then you sold those spots. And like here's YouTube, not free distribution. They pay you to distribute. And
Right.
then you get the most eyeballs. Like to me, even if they took away the ad revenue, like it's still it's all about like the top funnel, like deal flow, like you're getting eyeballs and you don't have to pay for the distribution. Like go on the Pursuit channel and drop 20 grand. Like
Yeah.
that's so antiquated. Like so to me, I'm sure it was a scare, and I'm so glad our business model is not based on that. But if I were someone in that position, I'd be taking a real hard look of like, how do we diversify? How do we bump our merch game up? How do we produce a product that people would like? And
Yeah.
because those channels are businesses. Like that's not.
Well, that's just it. That's the part that would make me nervous. If I were them, the handful of them that's their business model.
Mhm.
Um, you know, I've mentioned on the podcast before, like my background is I'm a digital strategist. That's what I do for a living, right? And so it's
Mhm.
all about the ecosystem and what you have kind of set up. And like that was you and I have texted back and forth before
Yeah,
about like, dude, the email list is king. Like if you don't
always
have
has been.
that, yeah, it
Yep.
always will be. I mean, that's like those are your hand raisers that you can rely on that'll support you, whether it's a product or viewing
Mhm.
something or listening to something or whatever the case is. I certainly think, same as you, if you're a product company and that's kind of what you're built on, then I think you have a little less to worry about because YouTube is an aspect of how you get eyeballs ultimately to your
Mhm.
product. And the revenue from YouTube kind of offsets like the content creation production costs and stuff like that. It's
Some
like,
travel costs, some
yeah,
some manpower, yeah,
yeah.
and that's great. It's wonderful. But if that went away, we would still be doing the same thing.
Right, right, because it's feeding a
Crucial.
larger beast. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
The ones that are just straight creators as a business, those are the ones that I get concerned for. Because they have to pivot and turn into a product company at some point, right? And
Mhm.
then, well, what is that product, right? Like, there's only so many like e-courses and stuff like
And
that
it's
that people are
hard
gonna
too.
buy. Yeah, exactly. It's hard. It's like if you're going to go into like a manufacturing thing, that's a whole different kind of avenue. And do you have the skill set to do it? Do you
Mhm.
have the capital to put up to launch it, get it off the ground? Do you have the capital to bring in the right talent or resources if you don't innately have those skill sets to do that
Mhm.
with you? You know what I mean? It's like, so it becomes a whole different thing. And I started thinking about if you wanted to keep just the content aspect of it, you have to start then thinking about it as like, no longer are you going to be a successful. I mean, you can now, but if YouTube were to say, yeah, we're demonetizing all hunting or whatever,
Mhm.
you would have to then kind of think about if you were still going to have your content be your product. It's like you now have to create the ecosystem that, to your point, it's like where YouTube is like still your quick hits and bits and information, and then there's a premium content section that is behind a paywall of some sort that you would use YouTube to get people to, right? And it becomes like, seek one because they're the ones that this was the most obvious that it happened to. It's like, okay, you have the YouTube channel, which is your feeder, and then you probably have like a website or an app or something like that where your premium content is, and then you probably need to start a podcast as well.
Yeah,
and you probably need to so you have to kind of create this ecosystem around you now. And it has to be an omni-channel kind of orchestrated messaging kind of approach to where you have a clear digital strategy and a clear content strategy for each one of those channels because they're each pulling different levers for you. And I was like, that is regular product businesses that have relatively good budgets still struggle with that. Yeah. You know what I mean? I was like, cause it's not easy. It's easy to whiteboard out and map out, but to execute it, that's the hard part.
100%. And yeah, I think, and I'm curious, I don't know how well the paywall video stuff would work. Cause you look at,
I don't know either. Yeah.
Because you look at some of these, I was talking to a friend about this, and like some of these larger podcasts, and you look at how many Patreon signups they have. Like I assume they're getting 5,000 to 7,000 downloads per episode,
right.
larger podcasts. They have 40 Patreons.
Yeah.
So clearly people, that percentage is extremely low. And now so that would be my concern. I guess my whole thought would be like email list is king and pivot. Cause the internet has only changed. It's only going to keep changing. So Don't be surprised when YouTube, I don't think YouTube's going to go away here in the next 4 or 5 years, but in the next 15 years, we're probably going to be talking about something completely different.
That's just it. Yeah. Yeah. Or it's YouTube just 2.0, you know what I mean? Or whatever it is where it's like they just changed the platform because if you pay close attention, you can see platforms do that because they start incentivizing behavior, and it's just like the way Facebook did. At first, it was just text. Well, they wanted to move to imagery, right? And so the algorithm changed to where they prioritized surfacing anyone who posted an image with text. And then when video became the next thing, the algorithm changed and they prioritized and gave more reach to anyone who was posting video content versus image in text or just text. And so these platforms, if you pay attention, you start to see whenever certain things become, all of a sudden your numbers jump. You're like, well, why'd your numbers jump? Well, take a look at your content. Or the type of medium you're using, did that change? And if that changed, there's probably a pretty good chance that they're looking for you to do something specific and they're going to, subtly incentivize you to do it by giving you that dopamine drip of more numbers. You know what I mean? So
but that's a whole other conversation.
Yeah, we can go down that rabbit hole for forever. But anyway, let's do another hard transition here, man, to hunting. So, we'll get to scrapes and stuff here in a second. But how just in general, man, how was your summer inventory in general, and then what are your prospects looking like after the shift and transition and all that stuff?
Summer inventory was a little bit delayed. I had about 25% of my cameras out in comparison to years prior, and I would say the month of July and the first 2 weeks of August. So kind of just absolutely slammed. Just so busy, and I hate to say that because it's all about priority. Well, summer inventory was not a top priority because I had other things going on, and so I deployed all of them. I think by the second week of August, found some really solid bucks in velvet on some smaller parcels, and then rolling in here. It's October 15th right now. It's weird. I was talking about this. I don't think I have as many top tier prospects in comparison to the last 4 years. Now, we'll talk about during scrape week, but that usually changes in about 10 days.
Right.
But no, I have some bucks to hunt. I'm super happy. I don't have I'm not obsessed over a deer right now. There's 2 deer that I will be obsessed about as soon as I get a picture of them. I know they're alive, but for me, it's I'm not burning that mental bandwidth until I feel like I really need to. But I have nothing to complain about. Things are good. Things are solid. There's some good bucks to chase. I noticed a lot of deer didn't necessarily make as much of a jump as I would thought or anticipated. There's 2 deer that come to mind that almost look identical from 4 to 5.
Okay.
So that's kind of what I've seen. And there's 2 deer that I know that did make really big jumps, but overall I'd say growth felt a little bit below average.
Right. Now those 2 that you said you won't be excited about until they show up here potentially in the next 10 days or so. Is that pretty standard for those deer specifically that you typically don't see them much until you start to get a little a little later in the year, so to speak?
Um, well, one's without saying too much.
Yeah,
One of
yeah.
them, one of them is I have a new farm that I have access to that I think where I know that deer has summered in
Right,
the
okay.
past. Just local hearsay,
Yeah.
and I know my gut feeling says that he'll probably show up on a scrape here, like in the next hope. And if he doesn't show up the next 10 or 12 days on that farm, I'm mentally kind of writing him off.
Right, right, yeah.
Because I think that's if he doesn't show up then it's just not going to happen. Now I
Right.
got access to that farm later in the summer, so like ideally I would have hopefully got a velvet picture of him, but that didn't happen. And then this other deer showed up in velvet. I have no clue who he is. He was in a bachelor group, and he was caught my
Caught your
pure
attention.
attention.
Yeah.
Yes, and so he was in there. He was in the bachelor group. I want to say one night.
Oh, wow, okay.
Yeah, it was very weird, and it was it's very strange because for whatever reason I had a cell camera there, and it was like a old food plot from last year, and a lot of it came back volunteer this summer,
Mhm.
and the deer were just absolutely demolishing it. I mean,
Hmm.
it was drawing deer from all over the place, and there was a super solid bachelor group. My gut feeling is he'll show back up during the rut, or at least hopefully here pretty soon. And I don't know, it's that October 24th, 25th. It's like a lot of those deer, like the historical data, I think is most eerie during that time of year, in my opinion. But yeah, those are the two deer. I don't know for sure what's going to happen, but you best believe I have every feeler and idea and thought in place here because I do not want to screw up the opportunity if they're there.
Yeah, no, that's a good approach, man. Not burning the mental bandwidth on things that you can't control quite yet at the moment. You know what I mean? Because
Hmm.
I've tried to do a better job of that this year, where I did hunt some early in the year. My season comes in like mid September, so I did get out a little bit, a morning here or there when we had like a nice temperature drop or whatever. Whenever I saw some cell cameras start to pop of just bucks traveling, kind of catching them as they're transitioning or as they've kind of shifted their ranges or whatever. Seeing a couple new guys or whatever, so to speak, and thinking, all
Hmm.
right, I think I know where they're bedded. They're using this particular area. It's really really easy access as far as low profile. It's basically a kayak spot, so I can basically go in and I walk 10 yards and I'm in a tree type of thing, So
Oh,
it's
nice.
like it's low impact, so I can hunt that a lot, if I wanted to. And so I
Hmm.
did a couple morning hunts there, and but I have and I shared some stuff with you. There's a couple
Yeah,
that I have my eye on, that I've been kind of
solid deer.
watching. Yeah.
Yeah, really
And
nice deer.
I just in years past I probably would have went in like my underwear on fire trying to kill, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But this year, especially, it's made it a little easier because the weather, especially this past week, hasn't been great. It's been a
Hmm.
little warm, and so I've managed to be patient this year, and I've not been in. I went in. I did one hunt when I knew that particular deer was kind of in the area, and I knew kind of what wind he liked, and we were getting a switch to that wind like that day. So I actually went in on an evening and hunted him on that particular day. But I really went in and hunted him because I needed to map out new access, and I was
Hmm.
like, all right, I need to go in daylight. I mean, I'm familiar with the area because I've hunted it before. But I was like, the way that deer is moving and the way I'm seeing him, I started, and we'll talk about video in a second. And that was something I picked up more specifically from you.
Hmm.
It helped me understand how he was accessing this scrape essentially. And
Hmm.
based on what I was seeing on that, I was like, if I use the same access I'm using, I was like, I don't know that it's gonna be good for me, And so I was like, I might need to change some things up. I actually talked to our buddy Greg Litzinger about it.
Hmm.
We actually got on a map together and looked at it and was like,
Solid.
trying to
What?
think about where he might be bedded and what my access needs to be. And so I actually just went in and mapped out my access. And that hunt was like, I was like, there's a 30% chance I'll kill him on this hunt potentially,
Hmm.
but I need to know how I'm getting in and out of here. That way I'm not bumbling around when it's go time, And so that was really what that was for, is
It's
to map
huge.
that out. So,
Yeah.
but, are you a morning, for October, and I know you like scripts. Are you a morning guy, an evening guy, or just like, I ain't getting out of bed unless like I have something super consistent?
So I, I this year I've transitioned into I've always been a morning person, and then there was a stint where I wasn't. I was more of a night owl, and now I'm back to being a morning person. So I get up at 4:45 every day now,
Hmm.
and part of that's just from being busy. So
Right.
you
Right.
got more stuff to get done. Just wake up earlier.
Right.
And so from a hunting perspective, I don't typically like the month of October. I really don't hunt that many mornings in October here in Illinois. It's like larger ag fields, and I feel like
Mhm.
access is really challenging. Last year, the first morning I hunted was October 20th, and I did have an opportunity with a buck that I wanted to try to shoot. He just it was 80 yards and just didn't happen.
Mhm.
I have not hunted. Honestly, I haven't even hunted yet this year. It's October 15th.
Really?
Tonight's going to be the first night.
Oh, is it
So
really? Nice.
yeah. Yeah. And so that's kind of where I'm at in terms of like more, I guess the like later part of October, early part of November, like then I'm hunting a lot in the mornings.
Right.
If permitted, and I have a good feeling that it's worth the risk. But honestly, it's hard. Like access in the morning, I feel is really challenging with a lot of the farms that I hunt. I don't have like that bulletproof access on a lot of the ones I spend a lot of time with. So
Yeah.
I always like, and I've like same thing, like listening to other people, like, well, they wait till daylight and they slowly go in. That just feels like everything against I've ever been taught.
I know, man. It's like I'm the same way, but I'll be honest with you. Like I started using that more so because of freelance hunting a lot, like to where it's
Mhm.
like I just can't go in the dark. I'll have no clue where I'm ending up, you know. And
Yeah,
so
especially then.
yeah, and so for that reason, I just started getting a lot more comfortable with it. And the other thing is too is like if I know where I think deer are supposed to be, getting in either before they get there or getting in after they get there, either is fine because I'll either kill them on the way in or
Mhm.
I'll get the opportunity to kill them when they're on the way out. So
True.
I just need to meet. I just needed the priority for me is just being in there without them knowing that I'm in there, regardless of what time I do it. You
Yeah.
know, because I'm going to set myself up where I think I'm going to have a shot opportunity, regardless.
Mhm.
So but I used to struggle with that too, where I was like, man, it's cracking daylight. I'm not in my tree.
Yeah,
Now
you feel like you're late to the party.
yeah, and what I've realized is like a lot of times I wasn't. It's like a lot of times I'd get in my tree and then all of a sudden it'd be like 9 o'clock and a deer comes strolling through. You know what I mean? Where it's
Sure.
like I've already been in my tree for like 2 hours because I got in like at gray light.
Snacks all gone.
Snacks are all gone. I already peed once. It's
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
oh man, but yeah. So I kind of teeter on both. It's like I'll let the deer kind of dictate, and that's where the cell cameras for me have really kind of come in handy. It's like
Mhm.
this one particular deer that I shared with you, he seems to be way more active in the morning. Like he's already started cracking like gray light. Like I've gotten
Oh yeah.
pictures of him in the past, probably in the past 7 days, I guess, like two different times where he was at like 6:58 and 7:04, like where he's hit a scrape or whatever. So
Mhm.
I'm like, and there's a really pretty dense canopy in this area, and I'm like, I probably need like 10 more minutes to have like legit like shooting light, like good shooting, decent shooting light.
Yeah.
So but it's like, to your point, I don't like to hunt mornings typically in October, but I'm like, if this dude's telling me he's a morning guy,
Sure.
then
Figure out a way if you can. Yeah.
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 So man, I want to talk about scrapes because we've alluded to it a couple times.
Mhm.
Scrapes are, I know it might be one of your favorite things, not just related to deer, but maybe in the world in general.
It's up there, top 5 for sure.
Right. But I want to start, kind of like where did the fascination with deer start for you? And then ultimately, where did the fascination, like, how did that kind of parlay into scrapes?
Yeah, I was born into an incubator for deer. I think for like for we my family's very deer centric. We had a small deer farm. Literally, I think they started basically from my earliest memory as a child. We've had deer forever. So like you grow up in that. So I've always just really liked deer. Like I feel like the weird horse girl. Like I like deer.
Right.
But
Can't articulate it. I just like deer. Yeah.
yeah, I've just always they're fascinating animals. They're really cool. Something that I've realized here later is like how blessed I am to actually have grown up in Illinois.
Mm.
Not to say that I grew up, it's the best place in the world for deer, but it's a
A
a
really
good place.
solid
Yeah,
place. Yeah.
it's not Pennsylvania, it's not Michigan, and I'm aware of that here later. And part of that's traveling around and like getting a better perspective. So that's kind of where it's happened. And then um, like I said, I took my studies like super serious during school, high school, and so I would hunt, but not to the recklessness of that. And
Right.
then once post college is actually when I like got really into it, and that's super thankful to have been able to start working with Exodus and have a deployment of cameras that I could try to start learning things, because before it's like I have 3 or 4 and you're trying to do the
Trying to
most of
piece a
work with
puzzle
it.
piece together like a
Yeah,
thousand piece puzzle, but you only got 3 to start
yeah.
with. Yeah.
And then I think after the first year I was with Exodus, I maybe had like 10 cameras. A year after that, I had like 17 or 20. And then it's like, wow, okay, now we're cooking a fire and I'm learning a lot. And so I would just, like anyone curious trying to figure things out, scrape. Okay, I want to see what bucks are hitting it.
Mm-hmm.
And I was pretty oblivious to what, like, any strategy. Like, this is, I guess, kind of purely born out of my own curiosity and own data here. And it started happening. Like, wow, some people say scrapes are dumb, but like, here's this big buck hitting the scrape in daylight.
Mm-hmm.
And then it just kept happening. And like, well, okay, well, some of these scrapes are way more productive than other ones. And then that is kind of the evolution of, like, once we started trail cam radio and talking to people and listening to different things, like, start piecing, like, so okay, maybe that is why that's the case. And then I go back and I compare the notes, like, oh yeah, that does make sense in terms of, like, relation to doe bedding, the amount of mature bucks in an area that may have an overlapping range, or maybe like competing for does. What is the deer population in that section? And like, the amount of does, does that make an impact on the amount of bucks that roll in late October? And then it's like a pure numbers game. So, like, those are things that I just started to notice. And then it's like, from the hunting perspective, like, okay, when's the best time to kill one of these big deer? And it's like, well, honestly, probably right around that scrape week. And that's how we did that. And I think for a lot of people were waiting until November. And someone that listens to your podcast probably isn't waiting until November. But I think a large majority of the population wasn't taking advantage of what I felt was one of the best times to at least have a fun time hunting.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's why we started Scrape Week, and we went and talked to people who are diehard people and, like, have experience in that, and, like, breaking down their late October strategy. And that's kind of the birthing of Scrape Week. And it's been so fun. It is, I think, I have an extra, like, pip to my step there, because it's like, hey, like, these are the best card pulls of the year, in my opinion.
Yeah.
During that time here.
It's funny because, from, not just working with you and Chad, but, being friends with you guys, I get the halo effect of the benefit of the data that you guys get. It just being truthful, you know what I mean? Because I'll talk to you, or I'll talk to Chad, or I'll talk to Cameron, or whatever the case is. And we're always, just like hunting buddies do, it's like we're always swapping information, stories, what we're seeing, and stuff like that. And it wasn't a big surprise, because I was just on your podcast on Truck Camera Radio this week with Chad. Yeah. I'm not sure when exactly that'll come out, and we were talking, because he was like, dude, he's like, your trail camera game, like, this year is, like, on point. He was like, you're getting big deer on camera consistently. And it goes back to what you said, where it was, first couple years I had a few cameras and I was learning some stuff. But it's like, once I got, like, an inventory,
it's huge. It's so important.
I started kind of, like, the trends and, like, patterns start to pop out at you then, and you start to see things, and, like, and it's just you start to be able to qualify scrapes, what I mean, more quickly. It's like, you can now, I don't need a trail camera on one necessarily, and I can tell you with pretty good certainty whether or not it's going to be one that's going to be active in daylight, or if it's going to be mainly at night. You know what I mean? Sometimes you still find those ones where I'll just take a flyer on and put a camera on it, because I'm like, I'm not sure about this one, and you're like, let the data tell you the story, but yeah, and I used to be of that mind where it's, I would wait to kind of like November, and that's whenever I would, hunt scrapes. But the reality is like, man, a lot of them are closed up by then, or they become less active,
Yeah.
And so,
and you become so much more effective in November by knowing what happened to them late October.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And so, and I agree with you. It's like, it's one of those things you were talking about. It's hard to break the habit of getting in before daylight type of thing, right? Going in with like just a little bit of light. The hard habit for me to break is that I really, really want to start taking my time off that last week of October, because I feel like that 20th through like the 31st, is like, is the money time to try to kill a big deer, like in and around a scrape, because you're moving away from being able to bed hunt him at that point, because he's going to get a little bit more active, right? And he's going to start to move a little bit more, and he's going to start to check scrapes. So that becomes a time like, well, okay, now, and he's off of food at that point. Like, acorns are still kind of at play, but he's now kind of starting to get on a mission of like, I got to start inventorying, right? And so at that point, then, like, the primary kind of destination spots become particularly like those community scrapes, those places that are like outside of doe bedding, or outside of like just general like bedding cover, or security cover, or whatever the case is. Like, they almost replace the destination locations to a degree. But I still haven't broke my ties yet with taking my trips in like November sometime.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I think that's part of it too, is like hunting a lot of small parcels too. It's like, you have a pretty good idea where he's probably bedded. Can't hunt it. Right. But guess what? You got a freaking giant community scrape, and he's been in there in the summer, and he's let you know that he's alive. And then he shows up maybe like the 15th, 17th, or 18th, or 19th at night. And then you're like, okay, well, this next cold front between the 24th and 27th, 28th, like you need to be in there.
Yeah.
From what I've seen with running a ton of cameras.
Yeah, and that's kind of, and that's really when I talk about historical data from my cameras, that's a lot of times what I'm referring to is like the scrape data, because I have one right now that I'm watching where he looks like he might be the same deer from last year. I can't 100% tell. It's near this big community scrape. Last year he hit it he started showing up at night like this week, like mid this week. It was around the 12th, 13th ish, something like that. And he hit it the same time this year. And then he daylighted for the first time last year this coming weekend. So like between tonight and like Monday night, he'll hit it in daylight. I'm almost positive, right? And so I'm kind of watching the weather's going to drop on Monday. So I'm like, man, Monday and evening hunt. Like if I were going to pick a day, that would probably be the day. It'll fall within like the 2-day window roughly that he was in the area last year. And so that to me, that stuff, especially this time of year, becomes like almost invaluable, that type of information.
Yeah, I totally agree with that.
Yeah. And what you'll hear guys talk about too, like I know I've talked to Litzinger about this, is he's like, man, that 18th time frame, like 18th to 20th is like when you usually see big deer hit scrapes for like the first time, like in daylight, where you won't have seen them at all. Like maybe you got velvet, but like they disappear kind of in a lot.
And maybe not even then. I've had where like you don't even get them in velvet there, like on a licking branch, and then it's like it is almost like clockwork, like the 17th to the 19th, 20th, and then it's like, okay, well they're alive and they're going to be back. And that was something I learned too, because the old adage is like scrapes don't mean anything. If they hit a scrape in the middle of the night, there's a 0.1% chance you're going to kill them. And I was like, and I had that adage for a while, and then it's like my cameras are saying something completely different. Like if they show up, then I'm going to have not necessarily an opportunity to kill them, but they will be working that in the daylight. I would bet almost anything on it.
Well, that rolls into like my next question. So it's like, it's qualifying scrapes, because I think that's what we really kind of get to, right? Because it's like, we all have had and seen scrapes or even hung cameras on scrapes where, we were taking a flyer on one and it was like, they hit it at night, but it really if it got daylight activity, it was younger bucks or whatever. And, those are things that are probably out in the open a little bit more. And I would say probably more scrapes of, I almost refer to those as pawings. Like,
sure.
You know what I mean? A deer just laid something down and he happens to be going by, so I'm going to hit it. But it's not a destination for him. You know what I mean?
You don't have does communicating with it really. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And so, how are you qualifying scrapes when you see them, and and how do you maybe like use different scrape setups differently potentially?
Yeah. So some of the better ones I found were in postseason scouting. And so that's one thing. The other one, something I always notice too is, so I guess the first one is postseason scouting, where it's like you can tell not necessarily like how large the actual scrape is, but like what is the proximity to that scrape, and then like what's going on in that area. Hopefully you hunted that area before, or you have some sort of knowledge to really piece it together. So that's one thing that is somewhat qualifying. And then you can put a camera there in the summer, and if there's deer hitting it, then it's pretty fair to bet it's a community scrape and it's going to be a great opportunity. Now there's another farm that it was literally the only scrape I found on this farm, and it was a community scrape. It was off the edge of bedding, and the same thing, like the majority of velvet bucks were in there, and it was like the scrape week action. And then like it went dead for a while, and then like around the 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th, like there were some bucks that filtered back in there. So that's one thing. And then the other thing in terms of qualifying, I think, is the amount of sign that's maybe around it. And it's like finding the scrape amongst many other kind of crappy scrapes that maybe only get hit once or twice. And a lot of it too is just from running 40, 50 cameras on a lot of scrapes too. Right. You just learn. Learn. But one interesting story in terms of like qualifying it. So I went down to the southern part of Illinois, and Tyler and Casey from the Element Podcasters, and then Anthony was there, and I cannot remember the last guy's name, but they picked out the spot. I had nothing to do with actually picking the spot, but we all walked it. And then Casey found a scrape, and I was like, guys, like this is it. Like you can kill a giant buck here at the end of October. And they're like, yeah, whatever. Like, I'm usually a pretty positive person. So they're just like thinking I'm just like talking up a average situation. And then so they put a camera on it, and then sure enough, there's some solid bucks that show up in the summer in velvet. And then Tyler called me. He's like, it's October 17th. We have a little bit of a front. I think I'm going to go up there. I was like, no, just wait until the next front. And they ended up first sit. They went there, killed like 150-inch 8-pointer on the scrape that I called it. Like they were the trigger man. Like they had so much more to do with it than what I did. but I said, this is the scrape. Like, you guys figure out how to kill him, but like, this is it. Like, I have no doubt.
He's gonna be here. Yeah.
Yeah.
You guys figure out how to kill him, but like he's gonna
Yeah.
show up.
Yeah. So that was just one where it's like, it's almost like you figure it out after time. Like you can just feel it. And I so to teach that is get a lot of cameras in front of me.
Yeah.
Figure it out.
I mean, it's you know, it's funny, but it's true, right? Like it's one of those things where that's like, you know, the way people use cameras, it's like you need to use it as a tool, you know what I mean? Not like to learn, not a crutch, you know what I mean? It's like, because I think a lot of people, if they get discouraged with using cameras, it's because they kind of rely on them to hunt for them. Whereas it's really just to kind of help me see the patterns and help me qualify things a little bit better and more quickly. And then, man, I mean, that year over year data is just,
it's huge.
I mean, it's just unbelievable. I mean, if you're not a, I'm just going to throw out random, like a Dan Enfault or at this point, like a Jake Bush, for God's sakes, you know what I mean? Who just kills big deer. That's what Jake Bush does, you know? If you're not like that in tune with like hunting beds and stuff like that you can kill bucks in early October because you just
true art form.
Yeah. I mean, it's just like, and there's very few people that can do that consistently. You know, I feel the best way to try to at least have good encounters and be in the right places at the right time on good deer is to run cameras year over year in the same spots, especially over scrapes, and get that annual data to know when when scrapes are going to turn on, like in those spots you're hunting prime spots. To me, that is, you know, I'll refer to myself as an average hunter. That's the average hunter's way of putting himself in the chips more often. You know what I mean?
100%. Yeah.
You know, because I feel like the other way, I don't have time to spend in the woods 5 days a week like some people do. And if they do, man, then more power too. And that's how those guys are killing. Like Jake kills big deer Jake Bush kills big deer because he just lives in the woods. Like he just puts
in the work. Yeah.
Yeah. He spends more time than anyone I know, probably. He puts more miles on than anyone I know, probably. And it shows up because he kills giant deer like early in October. You know, well, last year he killed one later, but he had some really good encounters early. But the other part of that is get your annual data from your cameras and make your plans kind of around that. So when you are in the woods, you're setting yourself up for high priority or high opportunity kind of sits, essentially. So mock scrapes, man. Yay or nay for you? What's your feeling on that?
Mixed opinion.
Mixed opinion. Okay.
Yeah, there's one that I made last year that biggest deer I ever got on camera ever, and it was on a mock scrape. People would laugh. It was a field edge mock scrape, and they're like, okay, a field edge scrape, those are worthless. But the issue was there's not a lot of cover in the area, and it was right next to the thickest cover where I had bumped bucks off that point before.
Right.
And there's usually a resident buck in there, so I put a mock scrape right there, and I got some of the best inventory there last year out of all the scrapes, including regular ones. And that's been a staple now. The camera right over right now, and I'm eager to see what bucks are showing up right now.
Right.
It's just a regular one. I don't have enough signal there. So that's one example of like putting a mock scrape in a very strategic location. I do have a stand there. It's a very difficult spot to hunt. And then there's other ones where it's mixed. Like I make mock scrapes. I made one yesterday actually, and I already had deer hitting it. And it's like, it's just not as good as the community. Like I feel like you can't create a community scrape. I've tried it. I just have not had it happen. That one from last year is an example. I wouldn't call it a community scrape, but it was a very high traffic one. And that was from terrain and the lack of cover, but there's thick cover right there. And it's like, check the boxes there. But to me, you cannot beat a community scrape.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm the same. There's nothing like the real thing. You know, that's kind of my kind of opinion. And I've had kind of, varying degrees of success with mock scrapes as well. Right. It's I've had there's one that I set in the Poconos that actually has worked, but it's not getting like hammered. I've been able to kind of locate a handful of really good bucks that have come through and hit it. It's almost like inventory, you know, and I put it in a high traffic area that was in some cover. And I knew deer were probably going to funnel through there, and they did, you know, and now I know who's in the area. But as far as like that being a priority for them, I don't know. I am intrigued because I'm going to kind of use a new. I've often used the Jeff Sturgis process. You know, some type of like vine. You know, it's kind of been what I've done in the past, and I've used Smokey's preorbital because Don Higgins uses that. I actually used it before I knew Don did, and I found success with it. And Don kills big deer, and he likes it. So I'm like, you know, He knows what he's
One
talking
plus one
about.
equals
Yeah,
two.
exactly. So, but the other thing is too is like some of these places, like that I'm hunting, certain areas are big woods, and so I wanted to talk to someone who hunts the big woods. And I think you guys might even have Troy Pottinger coming up on your podcast as well.
Yeah.
And he has a really unique approach because he's hunting Idaho and like the biggest of woods, with super low deer numbers.
Yeah.
And that dude just kills the game with
he's the goat.
legit
scrapes,
creating community scrapes. Like he doesn't just create a mock scrape; he creates a mock scrape that becomes a community scrape. And so I've actually got some of his secret sauce that he sent me. And I'm actually going to start building mock scrapes using his method and see if I get any type of different reaction.
That's gonna be cool to follow for sure. I think that could be huge, and to find to create a melting pot of bucks in an area with not a lot of defined movement.
Yeah,
that seems like a recipe for success, and he has definitely found plenty of success. The mock scrape I made last night is kind of interesting though. This farm, I have not found a scrape yet. I haven't poked around a ton, but like some locations where like, oh, there should be a scrape there. There's not a scrape. So I made one yesterday. It's in between two bedding areas. There's tons of old rut sign, like old rubs. And I put that mock scrape in there yesterday. And I feel pretty confident that should be solid, given that there's no other scrapes. And like, this is the most like from a textbook perspective, like, okay, buck should be cruising between the two bedding areas. It's, it makes sense. It's like downwind of the north wind for the major food plot. Like it makes sense.
Right.
It'd be interesting to see if it plays out that way.
And it's the only game in town. You know what I mean?
Right now, yeah.
Yeah.
And I was like, it's like, is there any bucks out here? Where's
right.
This place sucks.
That's usually where there's a giant, is what I've ended up finding out. Because like a lot of these deer that I'm seeing that are hitting some of these scrapes, I mean, dude, I couldn't pay someone to find a rub anywhere. And I've walked all over the place. I've seen some small stuff, and it could be just fooling me based on the size of deer that I've seen on camera, and like the size, like the rubs I'm seeing, like they're not matching. But I also know from hunting some big woods pieces that often is the case, where it's like I have been in places where I know there's a giant deer because I've seen him on camera multiple times. He's in the area, and then the rubs look like a Forky made it. It's like I've seen that. So last question, because I know we're running up on time here, but I want to get a sense of like, because this is something I've picked up from you, and it's paid huge dividends for me so far at this point, is how you're using cameras over scrapes. And that's essentially like, once I heard the story of how you killed your buck last year from Chad and what you learned from like the camera inventory, which helped you kill that deer, it changed my mind on how I kind of use my cameras over scrapes now. So you talk just a little bit about your scrape setups for cameras?
Yeah. So they're all a little bit different. And I would love to say that every one of them is like, elevated and angled perfectly and everything else. But that isn't always the case. I guess what I always do, every single lift 2 I have is on video mode, and it's not 10 seconds. Most of them are 25 to 30 seconds, which is, it seems like a long time, but when you're watching them, I'm telling you, you get so much more information. I just pulled the card a week and a half ago, I think, and it was a 25-second video, and it wasn't on a scrape, but it was like, I had elevated, and like you get the top 2 times, like the 2 G2s for the first like 10 seconds. And then like most people run their cameras for 10 seconds and maybe a 5 to 10 second trigger delay. But then he kept moving on, and I got a perfect look at this deer that I've been waiting to show back up. And it's like, you get so much more with running the extra video. And here's the other thing too. It's only scrape week for 1 week. Like this, we've been waiting for this for so long. Like if you complain about having to watch through long videos, or like, you're concerned about all these other things, it's only like, you can only make hay for the next 4 weeks. So like, pony up and do it right.
Right. Exactly, man. Well, that's the thing that I took from you. Cause I know last year, like you learned the demeanor from that deer hitting that scrape. Like, and
so I think are you thinking that 10-year-old I shot?
Yeah. That crazy old buck, because he was getting his butt kicked, and you would have totally screwed the pooch had you not seen that video on how you worked that deer to kill him. Yeah,
exactly. And that I learned of that deer the year before on a scrape that had 2 mature bucks. He was one of them that overlapped, and that was the same exact thing, where he showed up around the 25th, 26th at dark, and then he showed up. The only daylight picture I got of him in the year, that season when I started hunting that farm, was like the 14th or 15th. He was dogging a doe, but then he hits that scrape the 26th, and then a larger buck, to my demise, came in and worked that in Halloween, and then they were both MIA, and I'm thinking like, oh crap. And then I guess the proof in this is that second larger buck showed up around the 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th. He was in there chasing does and being a dumb buck for like that 4-day span. And the same thing with that deer I killed when he was 9, but I killed him the year after. He showed up after in the later part of the rut. So like it's not always late October. If they show up that later part of like the very last few days of October, your opportunity is probably going to be in November from what I've seen. But then the year after, I got videos of him. Never Velvet showed up October 24th and was this like haggard, looked like he got the hell beat out of him. And there was one of the largest body deer I've ever got on video right after, looked like Mufasa or something
right
at that bottom. And then I ended up having an encounter with him and fawn bleeded him in to kill him. And it's just like, you could tell he was, if you would have seen that, like, oh, that's an old grizzled buck, hit him with the meanest grunt you can, he would have probably went the other direction.
Right. Yeah. If you would have tried to extinguish him, as I know that's your.
It was these things. I slid it down.
You slid. Okay. You got to give some love to the extinguisher. But yeah, and I've picked that up from you because like you do such a good job of like getting inventory on scrapes, but not just that. It was like it's running the video, and that's what I picked up from you. It's like most all my cameras are usually over scrapes, even in the summer whenever I'm getting inventory, like looking for licking branches and stuff like that. I will put it in a funnel or like a cut where I have a food source or something like that. But I run a lot of times what I'll do early is I'll run it on regular, just kind of image mode to like qualify the spot, make sure I'm not getting a ton of false triggers. Then the first time I check it, if I'm getting deer on it, then I flip it to video mode because now I want to know how they're entering and exiting. This one deer I have on this scrape, like the thing that I've learned by watching a couple different videos from him is that he seems like he's pretty aggressive. Like he comes in and thrashes the licking branch, like gets his antlers all in it, basically peckers up, stands real tall, like, and there's been a couple deer kind of approach like the scrape while he's been in it. And he just kind of like peckered up, give him a look, and then they just kind of moved off. And then I've also got video of him bedding in it. And so I'm like, I'll have to send it to you, but I'm like, I'm like, this is his. I was like, that's a deer in Pennsylvania that I don't typically call much in PA. I was like, I feel like that's a deer that would possibly respond to light tine tickling. Wouldn't crack him like I'm in Texas, but I was like, he's giving me all the body postures to tell me that he feels like he's dominant, even if he might not be the oldest deer in the woods. He feels like he's the boss.
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I if you're not running video on your cameras during this time of year, you're missing out on so much. It's funny. One of the neighbors I hunt, we've been fantastic neighbor, very open communication, like full open communication, at least on my end. And I'm sending these videos of deer that he has like crappy nighttime pictures of like on a field edge. And he's like, it looks like a good buck, and it's like, and I sent him the video. It's like, oh wow, I didn't know he had a sticker there. He had
right.
forked brow tines. It's like,
exactly.
Beyond demeanor, you can really tell what
characteristic.
That deer,
exactly. As a term.
Is that G2 really 7 inches or is it 10 inches? And like you can really get a better idea.
Yeah. Well, man, I know we're up on time, dude. I actually got to jump into a work meeting, but before we go, let folks know where they can find out more about you, where they can follow all the different things you've got going on, where they can tune in to the new land podcast that you have going on, all that fun stuff.
Yeah. So you can find me on Instagram at just Jake Hofer. And you can find everything with Exodus at exodusoutdoorgear.com. We now have 3 podcasts for Exodus. We have Trail Cam Radio, which Chad and I host, I guess you would say, on Tuesdays. I started a new project called the Land Podcast, and that goes live on Mondays. And that's been such a fun project in the sense of bringing first-time land buyers on there and just talking about the whole entire process. And I've gotten a lot of feedback in terms of like, wow, I was always curious how that worked. And so it's just kind of educating people in that process, bringing experts on there, because I've noticed the guy that's done 15 deals versus the guy that's done 2, like shark and minnow.
Right.
and to break that down. So that's a super exciting project. And yeah, you can pretty much find everything if you go to one of the link trees at the end of our podcast, you can pretty much find everything you need to.
Awesome, brother. Well, hey, dude, I appreciate you coming on. Good luck to you here this October. I'll send you the picture of that buck bedding in that scrape. Yeah. And I know we'll stay in touch here during the course of the season, but I look forward to seeing what you got going on once you finally get into the timber.
Me too. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
All right, brother. Thanks. All right, folks, that is a wrap for today's show. I'd like to thank all of you for listening. And if you haven't yet, please head over to iTunes and leave us a 5-star rating. And be sure to subscribe to the podcast. And while you're at it, head over to YouTube and give us a sub there, too. I'd be super appreciative if you do those couple things for me. And before I shut this thing down, I need to give a big shout out to our partners who continue to help us make this podcast possible. Tethered, Spartan Forge, Exodus Outdoor Gear, Skull Brew Coffee Company, and Maven Optics. And until next time, we'll see y'all.